Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Divine Feminine Sacred Masculine Room as part of the Upconvergence Conference that is leading up to Peace Weekend 2020. And I'm very pleased to be co-hosting this lovely session with Liz Williams. And we are here to support Victoria and Ron Friedman in what promises to be a very inspiring time together as they speak about the evolution of a marriage. Victoria and Ron are co-founders of the Vistar Foundation. They're dedicated to consciousness, communication, creativity, and culture. Their upcoming book, The Vistar Method, a manual for evolutionary meetings, launches in fall 2020. Congratulations on that. Victoria is the founder of Spirit Club for Children, author of Spirit Doodling, The Effortless Expression of No Mind, and Florissa the Fish. Ron is an MD and author of 2 poetry books, Unaccustomed Looking and Forever's Looking. This is going to be an inspiring time together. And as they say, love will keep us together. So I give you Ron and Victoria.
Thank you, Annalisa. And we'd love to present this material, share it with everyone. And to begin with, our relationships, the people that are close to us, the people that are family, the people that are close friends, truly are a mystery. In the beginning of our relationships, many times we don't really stop and look around and say, who are they? What is our purpose in being together? How come they've appeared in my lifetime? So the journey of a relationship is a journey of discovery and growing into an understanding of what we really are to each other, what our relationships mean. Now, Victoria, if you will put the background. We're going to share this journey with you, an evolutionary journey, against the background, the context of the work of George Gurdjieff, the great Russian mystic and teacher. And there are 2 cosmic principles which Gurdjieff notes. That's very nice. I like both of them like that, which determine everything, how it is created and how it unfolds in the universe. The first law is the law of triads, represented in many religious teachings, which basically says it is an interaction of 3 forces that leads to evolution. Those 3 forces working together form a triad, can be shown as a triad, and they form the base of the next higher triad if they are properly resolved. The piano scale you see on the right is a representation of the great law of 7, which is the other great cosmic law. And what that law states is no matter what the enterprise is, if I'm going to create a galaxy or I'm going to get involved in a relationship called a marriage, it will follow certain rules, whether I am aware of it or not. And that law, the law of 7, is represented on a piano in the C major scale. And if you look at the diagram, you will see that there is something that happens in the C major scale, because between mi and fa and si and do, there is a missing black note. There is a missing semitone. And what that tells us is that any enterprise that wants to follow a straight line of development is going to encounter difficulties and will need a shock to bridge the interval between mi and fa and si and do. And that interval, that shock, is a new triad, a new purpose, a new direction. So with that understanding, and we'll relate that to our journey, Victoria, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so on our third date, Ron took me to a Chinese restaurant in New York, something that was very exciting because I lived in Westchester and I was 20 years old, just getting ready to graduate. And on our third date, we're having Chinese food and he said, "Do you ever think about your relationship to the universe?" And I said, "Is your apartment nearby?" So I think that was really, really the the law of seven. Okay, so marriage 1.0. Ron and I were married. Ron, how long were we married before 2.0? I know it was
10 years.
Hmm?
10 years.
10 years. Okay, so marriage 1.0 was the first 10 years of our marriage. And I must say for me, having been what we would know as asleep or completely in material conditioning, the people that I'm probably speaking to. Nothing wrong with the conditioning I had, by the way. There are a lot of people that live very nicely like that. I'm not judging it, but for me, it was not real. It was conditioning. So marriage 1.0, it was about Vicky and Ronnie. And because we say that now, because I can't remember us like the way we were, just the way we were. We don't want to be the way we were. So Vicky and Ron were married. It was a time of Vietnam, very tense time. Vicky, being from a Jewish culture, the minute she got into end of college, her parents started fixing her up with dates with Jewish doctors. That was just like one after another. They were very nice young men, really. They always took me to museums because I was an art major and they were smarter than I was. Anyway, so one day this Jewish doctor, Ron Friedman, called and took me out. And so we got married. It's kind of an arranged marriage because his family knew my family, So we got married. Everything happens in the everyday world, as they say, like up here and kind of on the surface of the ocean. And something much deeper is going on, okay? Because I got married, Ron was a great guy. He was a doctor and he was very nurturing, good caretaker, and I was scared. I was so young. I didn't want to live at home anymore. So that's what happened. That was Vicky. And, I think, so we both were in a little tension, and Vicky and Ron got married and, Ron went to medical school. He was in medical school and then he became a pathologist. And then they moved to Connecticut near family and they bought a house and they had a boy and 3 years later, they had a little girl. And Vicky had to have a Dodge Aspen station wagon with wood paneling. She had to have that car. Now it's probably the Range Rover. I don't know what the analogy is. So Vicky had that and they started living together in this house. Vicky wanted to decorate. She needed to have really incredible decorate her house because it was quite competitive in her social life. And Vicky arranged all the kind of social gatherings. She would talk to her friends and they would decide to go to restaurants and make reservations on Saturday evening. And then they would go out and Ronnie, he was very quirky. First of all, he was a doctor and really didn't take a lot of power. Like he was very humble as a doctor, just, if you're going to be a doctor, you might as well be a doctor. But he wasn't a doctor like that. And then also he had very strange interests, very, very strange. Vicky was very worried. The interests were like, there was a book called The Tao Te Ching on his office desk. So Vicky picked it up and read it and said, the Tao is the beginning of 10,000 things. She called her mother. She was very upset. They thought he needed therapy. Not only that, but he started studying something called a mystic, a Russian mystic named Gurdjieff. She couldn't even pronounce the word. She couldn't. So it was a huge tension. And then when they went out with their friends, he would say, I'm not excited about this. And Vicky would say, why is that? And he says, I just find the conversation dull. And I go, how can you say that? You know, these friends, he's a lawyer, she's a social worker. They have two kids, Naomi and Rachel. And I mean, that's it, you know, this is like as good as it gets. You know, for Vicky, it wasn't happiness wasn't a big thing, security was a bigger thing on the inside. Well, that tension plus, you know, marriage and money and intimacy things, it was really tough. And Ron left. Now, that took a lot because, you know, he was very attached to Vicky and the children. But he left. Vicky would have never left. She was too empty to be without the program. When Ron left, the program crashed. I mean it, guys. The program crashed. It crashed. It wasn't like I was having a bad time. It was as if there was something here and they pulled it out. And without a husband in the program, there was nothing in Vicky that could handle it. She started immediately, there was a separation, so she started immediately dating, furiously trying to find somebody that would fit into that program. But who's going to come in with somebody like Vicky, take care of two kids and a very high maintenance person? Not easy to find. So she was just about to crash out, really crash out. I mean, you know, the therapists were, her psychiatrist, an MD psychiatrist was really worried. Medication did not help, didn't sit well. And all of a sudden, with the help of a little marijuana those days, Vicky started to have this, I could say the seeker was born. Suddenly, there was something that wanted to find an answer. It was so bad, everything was so dark, and there was so little ability to relate to life. And at the worst moment in my life, and Vicky was going to a singles event, because she was always going to singles events. But that singles event was in a spiritual center. And she went there to find a man, but she didn't. She found the man. So when the student is ready, whether the pupil knows it or not, the teacher appears. And the teacher appeared as a man named Charlie, who was teaching a Gurdjieff group combined with Rudolf Steiner and the 12 steps of AA for those of us who were at the bottom. And
So,
yes, Ron.
what about Ron? During the first marriage, 10 years, and then it hit the first interval, the MIFA interval that you saw. The marriage came to an end, and a shock had to be brought in. Well, in that first marriage, Ron was a morose, disgruntled individual who, from as far as he can remember, was attracted to a certain depth, a certain frequency, you could call it, in the teachings, in the Tao, in the teachings of Buddha. I read avidly about the tea ceremony. There was something inside me that was attracted to a frequency, a vibration in all of these writings, in all of these teachings. And I found Victoria's friends, the people who were around us, who were perfectly nice, I found them completely boring. I said, why should we go out? Why should we go to a restaurant with these people? The conversation is nothing. We just talk about more restaurants. We talk about movies. I mean, the whole thing is totally worthless. What am I getting out of it? So after 10 years of bitching and moaning and having this thing inside that was driving me onwards, I left. And I have to tell you, leaving my wife and children with Jewish programming and the feeling I had for marriage, it was a very, very hard thing to do. Very hard thing to do. But that was the way it went. And I started looking. I lived alone next to the hospital. All this time, I continued working as a pathologist, handling these life or death cases, going to the operating room, being called in, having to make a diagnosis. Is this cancer? Isn't it? While the emotional stress of the separation, which by the way lasted 5 years, was so intense. And when I look back on this time, the only conclusion that I have is that a higher power of some kind was sustaining me while I was doing this work, which was critical work, and falling apart at the same time. And so spiraling downwards, both Victoria and I were reaching a bottom. This is AA terminology. We both reached the bottom at about the same time. We reached that mi-fa interval where the first octave came to an end and something new had to enter, or we would both end up God knows where. So this is Ron's life before the beginning of the next triad, which was given to us, that we'll call marriage 2.0.
So, as I said, the teacher appeared, and I was invited into a program that all I can tell you is when I came there and I went to my first meeting with the program, the teacher, Charlie, asked me, "Is this for you?" He was a man who was teaching, his mission was to teach teachers of teachers. And he really wasn't interested in improving lives. He was more interested in teaching teachers that would go on to help the world. So I said that I wanted to join. I immediately had to give up my relationship that I was in. I had to stop seeing the psychiatrist I was seeing before he would take me into the program. And then with a lot of anguish, I accepted those terms and I said yes. It was in 1979 on a December Sunday evening. And I can tell you, I went to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, all the psychic pain I'd had for 3 years was completely gone. And who and what woke up? My mother called on the phone. She did not recognize my voice. She thought she had the wrong number. Something happened just like that. And it was a different place. It was just completely a place that there was a different being living than was the Vicky personality. That's what happened. It was astounding. Now, Ron Friedman was living with another woman. We were separated. He was living with another woman for a few years who had children. And he was in the Gurdjieff work teaching. And I entered this program with Charlie. And in a little while, there was such a change in me. There was such a change. I started jogging at 6 in the morning. My face changed, my hair changed. I started giving out roses and I wasn't even like a hippie, you know? And there was such a change in me that Ron couldn't believe it. And I started speaking spirituality like that. I was like, my mind was open. Ram Dass, I love Ram Dass. I slept with Ram Dass my whole first 10 years as a seeker, you know, and all the teachers. So Ron couldn't understand what was happening. So he actually went and met this teacher, Charlie. He left the woman he was living with. He entered the program. He entered the program, not for me. We were not getting together. He entered the program because it was phenomenal. It was a miracle for many people. And just to tell you, one day in February in 1980, I was calling Charlie about an organizational matter. There were a lot of organizational things in the program. And he said to me, and these are the words, he said to me, listen, Vic, he called me Vic, the only person that called me Vic. Listen, Vic, you and Ron have to stop wasting time. You need to get back together. You know, it's not about what you like and what you don't like, your desires, his desires. It's much bigger than that. People are waiting to meet you. There's something you're destined to do, and that's all. If you want to continue and become a teacher, I would love to work with you. If not, God bless you. The door swings both ways. We'll be friends. He said, let talk it over with Ron. Let me know what's going on. Ron, I'll let you finish that.
So it's hard to recapture, these events emotionally. I mean, they're just a series of what you'd have to call miracles. So here I am at a bottom. I'm working as a pathologist, somehow continuing. I'm living alone in a room that is bare, has a cot in it, no plants. And for 6 months at this so-called bottom, some of us may understand this, I'm on my knees praying. And then Victoria finds she's always a little bit ahead of me. That's one of the hallmarks of our relationship. She's always in front of me, exploring, which you would think would be part of the masculine principle. But it turns out in our relationship, she's a little bit ahead. And then she tells me about Charlie. I have been in a Gurdjieff group for 2.5 years during our separation. I've been in a relationship with another woman, a wonderful woman. And Charlie, I am invited to a meeting with members of this group of Charlies, and Charlie is going to be there, which is really unusual. He didn't usually come to the ordinary meetings. Now, just a word about Charlie, his background. Charlie had been in AA, 12 steps, for 20 years, sponsoring an endless number of people. There was nothing you could do to put something over on Charlie. He knew you inside out. That's the way he was. He was a big man. He was over 6 feet tall. He had sparkly blue eyes. When you looked into his eyes, you thought you were seeing the cosmos. And he didn't fool around. So I came to this meeting, and he gave a meeting, which was unusual. I was sitting 2 people away from him to his left. At the end of the meeting, he looked at me and he said, "Is this for you?" So I said, "I think it is." He said, "Look, I was at a bottom. I was literally at a bottom on my knees in my room with nothing in it." He said, "Look, I can help you. I can give you the help you need, but you have to make a promise. And that promise is the help that you get, the knowledge that you will get, the understanding that you will have, you have to promise that for the rest of your life, you will give it away to other people." And he stood up in the meeting and he reached out his right hand and he said, "Do we have a deal?" And I reached out my hand, I took his hand, and I said, "Yes, we have a deal." From that moment on, it was as if a robe of white light settled on my shoulders. And for 2 years, I had an understanding and a grace that to this day, I don't think I have the understanding that I had at that time through the grace. It was extraordinary. Everything changed. And there was a commitment to the group. I should say that Charlie was traditional in his views. His main interest, as Victoria said, was teaching teachers of teachers, people who could help other people. That was his main interest. We did it in a group format. We used a 12-step format. And strangely enough, Charlie somehow, despite his involvement in AA, had gathered together not only the 12 steps, which he felt, by the way, were not being used properly. He felt it was a document that was beyond the way people used it. He had combined the 12 steps with the teachings of George Gurdjieff and Rudolf Steiner in a way that was utterly amazing. And he digested these teachings in such a way that he fed us like a mother bird feeds the infants. He just gave us the extract in a different way that we could understand, and he just fed them to us. And so this was the beginning. Meeting Charlie was the mi-fa interval with a new triad where completely the direction of our life had to be changed. Victoria.
Yes, so marriage 2.0, working on marriage, working on marriage. So the first thing that we were taught very strongly was, you can see this diagram, that you cannot do the work. You cannot do spiritual work for a marriage, okay? This is a hard thing to swallow because marriage is something that's in life that has its own laws and its own directions. And spirituality is something we do for self-realization, for discovery of our true nature, for knowing real I, knowing our higher self. So if we work on the marriage, like to make it better, that was a no-no. So Charlie was very blunt about that. If you've come here to fix up your marriage, you are the greatest of fools, he would say, because this work is about something so far greater. Will your marriage be included? Everything will be included. But you cannot go to work on your marriage, which meant that if you look at the triangle, what he meant is what we call may the force be with you, right? In the marriage, the may the force be with you is really good. So there's a man and a woman, or two men, or two, whatever it is. They're two beings, two human beings. And then the question is, what is their third force? The question was always. So that's the kind of thing that we started to investigate in our marriage. Let me just get out of that. So you can't do it for the marriage. So it was like, what do you want? What do you really want, that first force? What do you want? What will come up against it? What will happen? So in Charlie's group, the work in the marriage, it was phenomenal. I mean, by all sorts of, they call them aims. In the Gurdjieff system, it's an aim, but Charlie had his own form of aims, and the group had sponsorships, and it was a very interactive group, very interactive. And although he was the teacher and the leader, but everybody gave meetings. It was very, very, very interactive, as I said. So the first thing he said to me was, Victoria, Vic, why don't you go home and have an aim of not making decisions, like for a week? An aim was something that was suggested that you could try to wake you up, to see what's really going on. Like I suggest everybody take an aim of no complaining for a week. You would die. Anyway, but so he said to me, here I am, you know, I'm married, I have 2 children. Ron is back with us, you know, he told us we got back together, just like that, we did it. So the first thing he says to me is, go find out, he says, just have an aim not to make any decisions for a week, like any decisions in the household. Next scene is at the kitchen table. I'm at the kitchen table, Ron's at the kitchen table, he's reading the newspaper, the children are there. They're about 10 and 13 or something, like 10 or 12. They're there, and we're going out for dinner. And the son says, Mom, where are we going for dinner? And I go, oh my God, I can't make decisions. See what an aim does? Like if you have an aim somewhere, it's so awakening. If you can remember it, you can't even remember it. So the mind does not like it. It's very mechanical. So it's really not easy. So I go like, I don't know, where do you want to go? And my daughter looks up and she says, Mom, where do you want to go for dinner? And I go, I don't really care. I said, Ron, where do you want to go for dinner? And Ron says, I don't care. He's reading the paper. My son says, Mom, where do you want to go for dinner? I go, I can't make a decision. I don't know. Mom, just tell us where you want to go. So I don't know how that sounds to anybody, but you know, it's not like I saw myself as an extremely dominating mother and wife. I didn't know. It was just natural. Like, I don't know. It was like, where should we go for dinner? Oh, let's go here. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, let's go there. It's a good place. Ta-da. most of the time. So that's the kind of work that started to happen, like really raw nitty gritty work like that, that was so shocking about what, what really looking at conditioned marriage, but now in a spiritual way, because we all had aims and Ron had his. Do you have a scene from the marriage, Ron?
Oh, yeah.
Spiritual.
Well, the other side of the story, which you just heard,
Yeah.
was that it didn't matter what we said we wanted, because Victoria always decided where she wanted to go to dinner. So there was this interaction going on, and finally the family sort of gave up and said, okay, make your decision because you're going to make it anyway. That's the other side of the story. You have to have both sides complete. When you go shopping for clothing, men and women go for shopping for clothing, there's usually a chair in the women's clothing department. And that is for the man to sit down while the woman is going around making her choices. Now, when I used to go shopping with Victoria, and remember, everything is seen now through a spiritual framework, I used to get very tired. Victoria used to go into a store like, I don't know, Lord and Taylor, whatever, and she would scan. To me, it looked like she would scan all of the products and make her decision within a very short period of time. And I would stand there. I wouldn't understand how she could possibly do that, because when I went shopping, even for an umbrella, it would take forever. I would look at everything, I would evaluate everything. And by the time that we were shopping, I was exhausted. Literally, I would have to take a nap. I felt something had been drained from me through this shopping spree, while she seemed totally invigorated, and I couldn't understand it. So we began to understand what was happening through the Gurdjieff work. And there's something called, how many impressions can you take in? Can you digest at the same time? And shopping, or living, or a relationship is impressions. How much do you take in? How much can you allow to energize you? And if you can't take in impressions, you get tired. You feel like something's been taken out of you. So I would go shopping alone, and I would push myself. I would go to the point where I would get really tired, and then I went a little bit further. I didn't go home and take my nap, but I knew what I was doing, and the teacher helped us to understand. I was expanding my ability to be aware, to take in more and more of what was going on around me, and not be overwhelmed by my limitation of taking in impressions. And I can tell you, I now enjoy shopping. I'm just about as fast as Victoria. And when you really understand what you're talking about, attention span, the ability to be aware of what's around you, relationships, people, it's a big thing. It's a pretty big thing. But this is the kind of work that we did with Charlie. This was the first mi-fa interval, and meeting Charlie was the shock that took us beyond the mi-fa interval into the next octave.
So you can see that we could give you lots and lots of examples like this, because you can see that, working on the marriage is not a good thing. Ron was working on himself. We had to find out where we stood in the picture. You know how many times couples fight because they go on vacations and the women like to look at everything and a man doesn't? People don't think of why. They don't think of why that's happening. What is happening to them? It's all, marriage 2.0 is for people who want to change. It's not for people who want to try to make marriage work the way they thought it was supposed to be. So the only way to do that is to work on ourselves. So there were a million things like that: vacations, food, cooking, so many things that happen in a relationship that are very real, the things that we really live with, how our children, how we relate to our children, what what, the whole old paradigm, the female is passive and the male is the one who does the discipline, that hardly exists anymore. So it was a real look at all those places. But the main thing I would say about it, it was so wonderful because it was so awakening, about what is going on in this whole situation. And then we came to an end of that. Charlie actually came very, very ill and the group ended. And Ron and I have had this astounding marriage, and you can see why we were told to get back together. That's why we say it's astounding. What happened was astounding. And then all of a sudden, the minute Charlie's time with him is over, right on our doorstep practically appears, and our awareness gets into this other teacher, and his name is Kenneth George Mills, that I've talked about in other conferences. So we call this 3.0, and frankly, it was psychic whiplash. First of all, the Gurdjieff work and Rudolf Steiner and the 12 steps are very processive. You work hard on yourself. We worked very hard on ourselves. We meditated, we chanted, we did it really from morning till night. We always worked on ourselves. Then we come to this teacher who says that there actually is nothing you have to do to work on yourself. And in relationship to marriage, poof, marriage. I mean, it's there, but now it is a question of identity. Now it's no longer you're a wife of a family. That is not my identity. I am not a wife of a family. I am not a mother of a family. I am not a woman of a nation. I am not a woman. I am conscious experience primarily. And now the focus is to look at that, not to consider the other. And what does that do? What does that do in terms of that? So there was no process suddenly. We did not have to work on our marriage anymore. There was no work to be done. There was just discovery to be made of who are we? What are we? What has never changed? What has never changed? Like all the things that change about us, our mind, our body, our hair. Marriage changes. You're married, you have a good day, you have a bad day. You get divorced, people get separated. What doesn't change? And how does that affect being a mother? How does not being a mother make me a really, really wonderful mother? We're so close to our children. How does not being a wife, Saturday night, you don't have to be with your husband. Every Saturday night, you can't go out with a friend Saturday night, because Saturday night was date night in marriage 1.0. So Saturday night marriage 2.0, you have to be with your husband on Saturday night. This is so, I don't know, maybe this is an older paradigm, but I see it with young people too now. So that question of identity was very big. That was marriage 3.0. It was a complete shock. Oh yes, Ron, that's the CEDO interval.
Put up my diagrams, the Gurdjieff diagrams that I love so much.
Here we are.
Can you screen share them again? Yeah, those two. So, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see the cursor?
I'll do it, Ron.
Huh?
I'll do it. I can't. It's on my screen.
So the MIFA interval, the first shock in which we needed a complete remotivation was when we met Charlie. On the course of our marriage, that first MIFA interval, where a new triad had to come in, a new reason for living, a new direction, was when we met Charlie. Then from MIFA to CEDO were the years that we spent with Charlie, 10 years. And then the new CEDO interval with a new triangle, with a new motivation, which had to take place in order to keep us evolving in a spiritual direction, was when we met Dr. Mills. We can take it off. So Dr. Mills, Kenneth George Mills, was a totally unique example, witness, practitioner of non-duality. And I don't know, some people are not familiar with the basis of non-duality. It's a teaching which is thousands of years old, and it can be best stated as not two. Unity, not two. There is no duality. Everything is one. And as Victoria mentioned, this was psychic whiplash to us after Charlie. After working so hard on character building, on the details of our relationships, on making ourselves more conscious, better, we met someone whose only interest was to let us discover what we, in essence, were. He would speak about other teachers as well, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta, and so on. But what he gave us, what he allowed us to discover in ourselves, was the gift beyond any price. I have to say that. And it was the next stage of our evolution, because now we were beyond roles. Now we were slowly beginning a new sight of the way we could see each other, not as separate, as one, and everything around us, people, life, completely changed. And as you can imagine, I mean, this was a challenge. And at the same time, we had a relationship in Dr. Miller's group where he recognized the value of what Charlie had taught us. And for a year and a half, we were allowed to teach what we had learned in Charlie's group within the structure of Dr. Miller's group. And this was an extraordinary opportunity, because this set us on a course of the next stage of our relationship, myself and Victoria, as teachers.
Yes, I have to say that it was in marriage 3.0, which is kind of moving into 4.0 when we started Vistar, but in marriage 3.0, that it just was like marriage suddenly, it like, you know, it wasn't, instead of big M, it was little, it was lowercase. It kind of melted away. And I experienced it with, in the non-dual teaching with Kenneth Mills, as I experienced it as like, as we were moving into something else. Like, see, in 2.0, you're still working on the marriage. There's such a thing as a marriage. But in 3.0, it's like, it begins to melt away. And so what happens is you begin to see something that looks like another being, not somebody that is supposed to give you what you think you want, not somebody supposed to act a certain way, not at all. Like, you know how if you are with certain people, you'd be in the car, you'd never say the kinds of things that somebody would say to their husband or wife, like, you know, because the expectations, the familiarity of conditioning. So this like open space, that's what happened, in open space in what appeared as a relationship. And there was not a lot of, like in Charlie's group in 2.0 and working on marriage, there was a great vision about male and female coming together. Male and female coming together being one, like making two become one. That was a great vision. And we were given that vision about how powerful that was. And we were powerful. We were very powerful in our teaching together. However, two cannot become one. Because one is one, it's not two. So that is different. It's not the same kind of thing. So that's, you know, what began to happen. How are we doing in time? We're doing good. So we started to move into Vistar Foundation. We left Kenneth Mills' teaching because we were starting to fulfill our promise to our first teacher. It was natural. It wasn't a promise outside ourselves. It was what we were, what we always wanted, what was always meant to be. So we put a little ad in the paper in Connecticut and said it was a group for people interested in spiritual teachings and application to everyday life and the discovery of true nature.
Seriously interested.
Yeah, interested?
Seriously interested.
Seriously interested, yeah. And and this is 1990, I think it was 94. So many people showed up. It was before internet was big, and so many people showed up, and we taught groups here for 20 years, close to 20 years. And now our marriage was as leading these groups together. That was 4.0. Now I tell you, honestly, a lot of things began to surface, even after the beautiful opening with Dr. Mills, everything there, that opening into that spaciousness of identity, of no labels. Oh my God. It's like a big breath. You know those big breaths. It's so great. And then all of a sudden, everything began to emerge. Competition between us, people in the group and how they should be handled, decisions, and what we thought. It was like starting to raise 20 people in a meeting. So that started to come up, and the people in the group also were working on different things. Many people were single, some people were married, some people, so all of a sudden we began to see that we were still, all those places that we were locked in, and this is really revolutionary, but we spoke with everyone to see if people would want to try conscious separations. Conscious separations. Ron and I actually separated again. We lived apart. He moved out. This was not a separation. It was a separation within a framework of a program with grace and love and understanding. For the purpose, the intention was to break those things, to see what that space, how that could be created, how that could not created, how that could be found. And so Ron and I separated. Some other married couples separated, like they separated 6 months. We separated longer, but people separated that didn't date other people. This was not a sexual, the sexual holiday or anything. This was what it was. And there were meetings about it and observations of how things went. And people came back together, the ones who did it, a few that did it, when they did. There was no time. When it was right, it just happened. And that's what happened to Ron and I. We went back together. At that point, that was pretty much toward the end when Vistar was the meetings were beginning to kind of phase out. We were going to more of a national thing, starting to work with Barbara Marx Hubbard together. And I can only say that I feel like I can say marriage 4.0 mystery. I don't know who we are, how we are together. I think it's amazing. I think the love is incredible. I'll let Ron have the last word.
I'm not the one to have the last word, believe me. But all through the Vistar Foundation and our teaching of this group, which was an extraordinary experience, so much we'll be talking about in the upcoming book. I mean, we didn't plan it. It happened. And the creativity that came from it, from everyone, was extraordinary. But for myself, and I think for Victoria also, through this last octave, which is the beginning of a new octave for us, when we started Vistar, that was the beginning, the dough of the next octave that had to take place with its own things, own intervals that will be coming up. For me, the non-dual teaching was always present. It was something we were always talking about. It may not have been in the foreground, but it was always there. And what has evolved for myself and Victoria in these years, in this last phase, or first phase, if you want to call it, is the miracle of attracting someone, of something bringing us together, where the most important thing to us, for both of us, is the discovery, ongoing discovery of what we truly are, of our true nature, of our non-dual nature. So through this entire journey, through this entire adventure, we ended up together looking aligned in the same direction. And I can tell you, there are not all that many people who have a non-dual approach to every aspect of their life who find themselves together with the perfect other to be a companion on this extraordinary journey. That is a miracle for which there's not enough gratitude to express. That's where we are.
Thank you all so much for sharing. Victoria, were you going to say something more? Sorry. What an open and honest conversation, and I'm very inspiring. And if you could, just for everyone who's attending and everyone who will look, how can we reach you, and what would you like us to follow up with you?
Well, you can reach us on www.vistarfoundation.org. You can reach us there. That's our website. And you can email us anytime you want, info@vistarfoundation.org. And of course, we're on Facebook, and I think this is going to be on Facebook. We'll probably stream it once we get the recording on our Facebook page. And so that's the way, that's the best places to get in touch with us. And thank you so much, Liz, for being there, that up convergence. Whoa, so much going on in Annalisa. And I know you have to go.
No, thank you so much. I mean, this was so rich and such a beautiful sharing, and I so appreciate your being so honest. I think anyone who listens is going to learn not only about themselves, but about the relationships that they're in. And I have lots of questions, and unfortunately I can't, so I'm going to have to reach out to you separately. But in particular, I think it's so interesting that in a marriage, we're not always at the same place. As you said, a spiritual growth or our growth may be headed in one direction, and our partners may not be there, and navigating that is so important. And then the last words that you said, Ron, I mean, just this, what a gift to have that partner for this adventure. If and that happens, it seems so rarely to have that perfect partner for the entire adventure, but it's beautiful sharing. Thank you so much.